Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the latest segment of Effecting Change, EFF's live stream series, where our panelists tackle the latest issues in civil liberties and human rights in technology and the digital world. My name is David Green. I'm the Civil Liberties Director at Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I will be your host for today's really great discussion we have planned. Before proceeding, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. We'll be recording this session, but only the video of our speakers will be included. You can join us in the official chat via Twitch at eff.org/livestream. In this chat, you can drop your questions throughout the program, and our guests will answer as many as they can at the end. And if you're comfortable, we encourage you to type a hello in the chat window now and let us know from which part of the world you're tuning in. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF is a nonprofit whose technologists, activists, and attorneys have been fighting for your online privacy and free speech since 1990. You are the reason EFF can take on this important work. If you'd like to help us in the fight to defend your digital freedoms, please consider donating at eff.org/supportchange or picking up a cool bit of EFF merchandise at shop.eff.org. And with that, let's welcome our speakers, Jillian York, Felix Lotke, Emily Liu, and Kenya Parnham. Jillian is the Director of International Freedom of Expression at EFF. Felix Lotke is the CFO for Mastodon. Emily Liu is the Head of Special Projects for Blue Sky. And Kenya is the Chief Growth Officer at Spill. Now, we understand there are many specialized and decentralized services out there, and that they're not all represented on this panel. But our goal here is to discuss issues that are common among them, and hopefully that we have a representative crew and we can raise a lot of issues. But feel free, if you have other things that we don't cover that you don't think are represented, feel free to raise those and we'll get to them at Q&A. The premise of this talk is that users seem to be frustrated with legacy social media companies because of unpredictable censorship, because of hostility, because of unreliable information. It all seem to collide on platforms that seem to design to exploit your emotions for ad revenue. But yet, social media has also sparked very positive social movements, fostered creativity, connected people in ways that were once unimaginable. So one of our overriding questions is it possible to effectively build the kinds of communities we want online while avoiding the pitfalls that have driven people away? So I'm going to start with this question, and I'll start with Jillian. Why are social media users unhappy? What did we do wrong?
Thanks, David. And it's great to have all these folks on this panel. So I think that there's a lot to say, and I imagine that our panelists from companies will have a lot more to say about it, but I want to focus on just a couple of key points. This is not comprehensive. So I think one thing is moving away from what I used to feel was a user-focused motive to more of a purely profit-focused one. And that happened for a range of reasons that have been written about, talked about, et cetera. So I won't focus on that, but particularly at the cost of human rights. Recognizing that the last wave of social media companies are all publicly traded companies, or mostly, I feel that there was like a noticeable shift around 10 years ago when a lot of these platforms, which had promised big things, bringing the world closer together, and slogans such as that one, that they began to disregard user and expert concerns. So really early on when I was working in the space, there was a lot of civil society engagement with these companies in what I thought were positive ways. But over the years, we saw these platforms, kind of disregard those needs, disregard human rights, open offices in places like the UAE, for instance, remove content at the behest of human rights violating governments, and disregard transparency, only re-engaging with it after big pushes from various civil society actors. So that's one. Two, I would say policy complexity. I mean, I think most of you, all of you following along tonight are users of one platform or another. And I think you probably recognize that over the years, these platforms created sort of labyrinthine policies to respond to various needs from government, special interest groups, civil society, and so forth. And so, of course, I recognize that there's a need for policies that protect users in many instances and speech in others. To put it plainly, I'd say that platforms, created these rules that are difficult for users to understand and abide by. I think we've all experienced that. And it's also hard to understand why one's content is being moderated. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention appeals here, that, I think that this is partly why we're seeing such a swing in the other direction, not from companies per se, but from users as well. And then finally, I think we have to talk about the hard swing towards machine learning and automated content moderation. Most of the major platforms are using a lot of automation in how they moderate content. And much of that, although all of those classifiers are created by humans, most of them are being used without a human in the loop. And so what I mean by that is without human review, without human participation in that process. So there's just a lot of opacity in how content is being removed. But that's just 3 quick points.
Great, thanks. Felix, what did we do wrong?
Thanks, David. Thanks, Gillian, for sharing your thoughts already, and thanks for having me here today or tonight at my end of the world. So to this question, I mean, where did we go wrong? I think it's a combination of algorithmic timelines coupled together with advertisement incentives. I think nobody can argue that that algorithmic timelines don't offer a certain benefits of resurfacing the best content theoretically to the user. But if you couple that together with a business model which is basically purely focused on advertisement, this just means that you start small, but you basically have to collect all the metadata that you can think of users, and this is something that it's very easy to go wrong if it's not handled carefully. And this is what all of us we have seen in using these social media platforms, that 10-15 years ago this didn't feel awful to use, but currently we don't really understand anymore why is certain content actually displayed to us, so understanding these algorithms, but also if the time that I have the time that I want to spend online basically feels like basically a commercial tour where just my minutes that I spent on this platform are sold to advertisers, and I'm sold stuff that I don't need. This just creates perverse incentives. That it's something that we both of these aspects is something that at Mastodon we really want to steer very far away from. So Mastodon is a non-profit, as some of you may know. There's no advertisements, and the timeline is based on timestamps.
Great, thanks, Felix. Emily.
Cool. Firstly, super excited to be here and to be in conversation with you all. So thanks for having me. I think to your question of where has social media gone wrong? Why are social media users unhappy? I'm a bit hesitant to dismiss social media off the bat as something that is all bad. Like David mentioned in his introduction, I think it's been used in really incredible ways, whether it's for digital organizing or just staying in touch with your family and friends that might not be in the same city as you. At the end of the day, though, I feel social media companies and user incentives just haven't been aligned. Surely there are employees at every company that have really good intentions, but at the end of the day, I think incentives are way more powerful. And so companies need to be designed to actually have user incentives and their best interests at heart. I think one example that comes to mind is just the way that some social platforms treat links. For some apps, they're incentivized to keep users in the app for as long as possible. Maybe it means more eyeballs on ads. In some sense, this just translates to more money for the company. And so as a result, now some apps, they just demote or throttle links. So if you're posting an article, posting quality journalism, other users might not see it anymore because the algorithm depromotes that. On Blue Sky's end, we just don't have those incentives in the same way. We view the app as a lobby to the open social web. We want to make it easy for you to reach both your social following and send them all over to your web presence. And so we just don't demote links or throttle links. And so publishers on Blue Sky have been seeing that really pay off. They're seeing so much web traffic come over from Blue Sky now. even if they've just made their account and have like way fewer followers on the platform than on apps where they've been around for like 10 or so years at this point. So I think like incentives just matter, and like designing the architecture both at a technical level and at a corporate level matter here.
Thanks. And I do think, I didn't say this in the intro, but I do think one of the reasons we're having the discussion is because we think that social media is something worth saving, right? That there's a promise to it, there's positive, there were times when it was really important for many people. And so I want to Kenya, give you an opportunity, because I know this is what you're trying to do, is to recapture the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. Wonderful to be in communication with you all, and thank you to EFF. You know, at Spill, we were founded off of, trying to solve one of the biggest issues that we see plaguing social, which is that the communities who historically drive culture forward across the internet, and that, specifically Black communities, brown communities, queer communities, the communities who create the lexicon and the trends that go viral, that inform ad campaigns off social platforms, that end up on billboards and commercials across TV, right? They unfortunately received the lion's share of hate and harassment on legacy social. The Anti-Defamation League released a report in 2024 that stated an incredible stat, which, as a Black woman who is a part of a community of folks who over-index on usage in social media, I can attest that this has been my experience as well too. That 1 in 4 of every American has experienced hate speech or harassment on legacy social in the past year. And for Black communities, namely Black women, that number skyrockets, to above 50%. That's 1 in every 2, right? And the problem is that legacy social algorithms have been programmed to incentivize and prioritize hateful content in the name of engagement, right? Which, at the risk of our mental and social health, we believe that it's just not worth it. That's what we're trying to build Spill to combat and show. So, the communities who have historically made legacy social platforms also have never really been built for or positioned to benefit from the platform's success either, until Spill. And we are a visual conversation app, the place to discuss and connect around culture topics, communicate through memes and visual conversation, and find and connect like-minded folks. We have been experiencing not only growth waves, but also massive increases in paid partner spending on platform that validates our thesis that platforms can thrive when they put safety and centering the communities who drive culture forward first.
So I wanted to stay with you, Kenya. How do we effectively build the kinds of communities we want online, while avoiding the pitfalls that have driven people away?
Sure. So Spill is built to center culture-driving communities through a winning combination of both cultural fluency, and by cultural fluency, I don't just mean, you can spew out the trends and, know who the sayers of what's hot and what's not are on the internet. I also mean people who come from these communities who have the lived experience to understand why safety on social is so vital, why it is quite literally life, right? And also a winning combination of technical expertise, which for us means a heavy investment in moderation and safety. Our team reflects the very communities that we center from every team. And at Spill, I lead 7. And, from a specific place, we have really progressive and strongly enforced community guidelines and moderation policy that is informed by culturally competent humans in the loop who go through extensive training. And we're building one of the first ever large language models trained for content moderation that is informed by these same communities who receive the most hate online. And for us, safety on social isn't just about defense, it's also about offense. And when you can be employ that on the offensive, that means that real connection happens. One of my favorite things to see on Spill all the time is, folks are meeting their new best friend groups. We've had couples meet on Spill, get married, and now have their first baby on the way that should be arriving in a couple weeks. I mean, phenomenal, right? Folks are getting that, nudge to write that manuscript for the first time, and, just what they need in order to, come back from, really large periods of social isolationism that we've all been trying to recover from in the last couple of years. And so, again, for us, this is about building technology that has cultural intelligence and prioritizing well-being and authentic expression in the process.
Thanks. Emily, what do you think? How can people effectively build communities online?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kenya's point about give the communities who drive culture the tools and the ability to create and design spaces. And I think Blue Sky shares a similar philosophy. I feel like from just the last decade, the way social media has played out, we've learned that it's almost impossible for a single company to just get community design and online safety right for every single culture and industry and community in the entire world. And so Blue Sky has this philosophy of give people the tools to design these spaces, give them the agency to create this, and then also give users both meaningful choice and the ability to exit. Blue Sky is an open system where anyone can customize it, build tools on top of it. For developers, any developers watching this call, we have fully public and free to use developer APIs. So we've seen this flourishing ecosystem where people are building their own algorithms that power custom feeds. So instead of using Blue Sky's default algorithm, you could create your own. We've seen people also create stackable moderation services as well. So I feel like this way of just giving communities and users tools is agency building in a sense.
Hey, Felix?
Touching on the topics that have been said already, I think Kenya mentioned its topic of authenticity already. This is also something that I would like to heavily stress, that authentic connections, I believe nowadays that connections especially online, but also offline, they very often they feel not real anymore and somehow awkward, and we don't know anymore whether this is a human or this is a bot that we're interacting with. I think we as humans, we are striving for these authentic connections that we remember from the early days in social media, and this is something that I think everyone who has joined Mastodon can feel that this feels more real than a lot of other social networks. But leaving this topic of authentic connections a bit aside, I think another point is the integration of formats from different tools, basically. So a community very often it's not focused just on microblogging. This is an artificial constraint, and by opening these platforms up to showing long form content together with short form content and everything in between, some more picture heavy, some more text heavy. I think this is something that represents the reality of or kind of the reality of how our information and data flows in a much more natural way.
Thanks. And Jillian?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. I think it's easier said than done to avoid these pitfalls, but I think it's really important that social media operators are striving for balance. I think we've seen this hard shift towards trying to manage and create policies around and moderate all of the content rather than sort of prioritizing and focusing on what is truly harmful versus what we can allow as speech. And obviously I'm focused on free expression, but I think that that's something that we've sort of lost sight of. And then focusing on utilizing existing human rights frameworks, which is something that EFF always emphasizes when determining their policies and processes. But I also want to echo something that Kenya said about cultural competency. I mean, I think that that's just such an important point. For too long, many global majority countries have been largely ignored by social media companies because they're not deemed as important or as profitable. And we've seen the outcomes of this in so many different places in the world. The result, of course, is content moderation that ignores local norms and languages. And so this is where, all of these points kind of come back to platforms need to remember that users, or people rather, should be the focus. That means things like transparency, giving users choice, giving them control. And I also just want to say, even though I'm focused on free expression, this isn't just about speech policies. It's also about how and why users engage with platforms, what they're using them for, what got them excited about them in the first place, and building that recognition into every level of operations. And of course, that means recognizing diverse needs of people who use your platform and responding to those needs. And I think just since it came up before, I was very excited about a lot of these platforms and a lot of the legacy platforms and how they could be used when they first came about. And it felt authentic about 15 years ago. And of course, that's really, really changed over time. And I'm sure we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, and just to emphasize the point, cultural competency is one of the baseline principles in the Santa Clara Principles. That EFF and many others were part of devising. So I'm going off. I think I've warned everyone. I'm going to go off our script just a little bit because the topic we talked. Everyone talked a lot about specialized communities and the best benefits for specialized communities, and that was really responsive to the question I asked about how you form communities. But do we have? Is there a risk of having a fragmented internet if we're all about specialized communities? Or is that premise wrong? I mean, does the internet not have to necessarily connect to the entire world? Is it possible, to build social movements if we are really community focused online? And who wants to go first on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there for that. I mean, look, we believe with Spill that centering communities who have historically been the most harmed, right? Building a world in which in policy and practice centers those communities' needs makes for a safer, more fun, more enjoyable place on the internet for everybody, right? No one is harmed when we solve for correcting and repairing some of the problems and the pitfalls that everybody on this call identified and spoke to at the top of it, right? I think the thing that takes courageous, right, it takes courage, and why we are courageous builders at Spill, is that for a long time free speech has been used as a dog whistle to say whatever you want to say without consequence. And we at Spill and the data supports not only in the mass droves of people exiting legacy social platforms who believe this, but also in the growth waves that we've been experiencing on platform. Over 282% growth from quarter three to quarter four in 2024. We're going to amass over $1 million in annualized revenue this year, right? All of that data supports that. Strong, culturally informed moderation with culturally informed humans in the loop not only makes community sense, but it also makes business sense. And everybody wins when we can create safer places that everybody can enjoy, particularly when we know what drives culture forward on social platforms. And so for us, imagine a feed of memes and food and art and TV and culture-informed gaming. And it becomes an incredible exchange for folks across oceans who have, similar lived experiences, but perhaps different ways of doing things. And it allows for learning and discovery and exchange in a way that informs our lived experiences. And we think that's really important.
Jillian?
Yeah, I just want to respond to that real quick, and then I'll make the point that I was going to say, which is, culturally informed moderation also does protect free expression too. And I think that that's an important point to add, that a lot of the wrongful content takedowns that we've seen over the years at EFF around the world happen because of a lack of cultural competency as well. And I mean things like political speech, documentation of human rights violations, et cetera, all over the world. And now I've forgotten the original question because I got too excited about saying that.
It was about fragmentation.
Yes.
Should we be concerned? Is it a concern, or is it
No,
is it
absolutely.
mutually exclusive? Do communities not necessarily mean fragmentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a concern. I know that my attention is spread across a number of different platforms, and I think that some of that is a learned behavior, right? Because for many years, a lot of us, particularly those of us who engage publicly, people who are educators, writers, journalists, et cetera, we're used to utilizing these platforms to advance our careers or our work or whatever you want to call it. And so it is hard to adjust to this new world. But I think, a lot of us are finding our stride in these and other platforms that have cropped up in the past few years. And so, yeah, I mean, it certainly, there can be fragmentation, but there can also be really amazing experiences.
Yeah, and Emily?
Sure. I think about the question of fragmentation a lot too. I think it's important for people to have a sense of like shared reality of like what's happening in the world, especially if our attention is being driven by hyper-personalized algorithms. The example I always think of is how algorithms are applied to like the TikTok comment section. There was like an article about this, maybe like a handful of months ago, I forget when, but it was like let's say an influencer posts a video where she's like talking about her makeup or something. Like maybe like in this report, it was saying how like one person's comment section there would show comments that were like, you look so good, like love your makeup, like what eyeliner are you using? And then for another crowd, their comment section showed a bunch of like harassment of the influencer. And it was like driven by the algorithm determining like what content are you more likely to be interested in. And I feel like that's just like a microcosm of like how we could be totally split on what we think is actually happening in the world. And so I do feel like this is like something to be concerned about. That being said, I still think that online spaces are way more diverse and connected than your IRL lives. I think like the real echo chambers can often happen just like in your life outside of social media. And so if anything, it's like social media is probably a more diverse place and you're seeing like more diverse viewpoints. In this case, I think like transparency and algorithms can help, and then also giving users the freedom to choose. Interoperability between platforms helps here, between networks. Some independent developers have built a service called BridgieFed, which links ActivityPub to App Protocol, which is the open network that Blue Sky is built upon. So it's like you don't even have to be on Blue Sky. You can be elsewhere and still see posts. And I think like that level of openness is also useful in allowing users to kind of bridge their social media environments.
Yeah, Felix, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I agree with this. So fragmentation, I think it's to some extent it's something natural to observe. I think that there will always be waves where things feel more centered and more concentrated on a handful of platforms, and then things break up a bit. And this is probably what we are observing right now, that a lot of builders, they are rebuilding parts of the internet. And I wouldn't say that fragmentation in itself is a bad thing, especially because from my understanding, the way that we are rebuilding it now is in a better way. So things may be fragmented, but as Emily pointed out, different services, they may still be able to talk to each other. This is something that hasn't really been possible in the past.
And Kenya, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point to Emily's point, right? That this is exactly why when Spill launched in 2023, we had a private beta that we people could access through single-use invite code. By no means thought that this was going to be the moment when we would go viral for the first time. We saw over 200,000 people join by single-use invite code in 5 days at the first time of our Apple-only beta launch. And that really validated for us that people were hungry for a space that spoke about centering in policy and practice, culture-driving communities. But what's been an incredible opportunity that these communities have never really had before is that they've been building with us in real time. So we've had a really awesome reciprocal relationship, learning, listening to user feedback from that initial launch. And over those last year and a half, that has informed our product development, that's informed our future releases, the timing of these things. And that's what has really influenced us into recognizing that community matters more to folks than ever before. Like Emily was saying, folks need to be able to connect in real ways, just like you were saying, Felix, and feel that human connection. It is life-saving for people. And so, us developing that reciprocal relationship with our users, receiving their feedback in real time, being a leadership team that is accessible and on platform all day, and receiving that feedback has, I think, made a difference in not just having user-informed product development, but also in building trust, which is huge as a platform at this time, right? To say that we may not always get everything right, but we're listening to you when you're talking to us, and we're going to go back and take your feedback and see how this aligns or challenges our ideas of a product roadmap moving forward. And we've been doing that successfully at Spill since our launch, and I'm grateful to say that the success that we're seeing right now, as we are, a little over a week into the launch of our first ever crowd round, where we've given users an opportunity to own a piece of Spill alongside of our VC partners who have invested in us, speaks loudly. Over $300,000 invested by the community in a little over a week tells us that folks are feeling that reciprocity, that we have built that trust, and they're with us in the long haul.
We have two of you are have decentralized platforms, both Blue Sky and Mastodon, and I'm wondering if just very briefly talk about both what advantages might decentralized platforms offer in terms of a better user or improving a user experience, and then what lessons can centralized platforms learn from the decentralized web.
Can I go first?
Yes, please do.
So multiple things. So I think the most important thing, although it's maybe a bit abstract, but it's definitely the most important thing, is that I believe that decentralization fundamentally it gives more power to the users, because you have freedom to choose. You don't have to use just a single choice, but you have multiple choices. So this it gives you basically a bargaining power that you haven't had before. I believe that secondly, from a network perspective, a decentralized network is just much more resilient, because if you want to take it down, if you want to take the Mastodon network down, this is something that is very, very hard, because Mastodon instances, there's more than 10,000 instances of Mastodon that are running in different jurisdictions. So I think this is clearly an advantage that this decentralized network have. And then there's of course other technical things, like it may even be more resource or less resource intensive to split up the load. I mean, both technically, but also in terms of moderation over different instances, different shoulders.
Thanks, Emily.
Cool. I'll take a step back and quickly define how I see decentralization. I think for understandable reasons, people get a little scared when they hear the word and they might equate it to like a bad user experience. So just to take a step back quickly, when we call Blue Sky like a decentralized social network, what we really mean is that we're trying to build this open social network where users have meaningful choice, whether it's of the algorithms that power your timeline, or even like where your data and your profile is hosted, or all the way down to like your username and being able to set your username to be your website. I think even still that feels a bit abstract and vague. So just to make it a bit more concrete, so using X as an example, like maybe you've spent 10 years there running a Twitter/X account. You have all of your followers there, all of your posts. And if one day you decide you no longer want to be on that network for whatever reason, you really have no choice but to just walk away from all of your followers, your posts, all of like the relationships you've built over there. And for people who are running organization accounts or like depend on this reach for a living, walking away from your audience is really hard. These closed platforms, they know that, and they know how high the switch off cost is. And so they know that they have users locked in and they're not really incentivized to keep providing a great service anymore. On the other hand, for Blue Sky, we want to bring competition and innovation back to social media. I'm sure Mastodon feels the same way as a decentralized network. So one way, like one analogy of how we want Blue Sky to work is actually like phone numbers or email, which sounds a bit outdated. But what I mean by this is like, let's say I use AT&T as my phone provider and David uses Verizon. Despite the fact that the two of us are using different providers, we're still able to call each other and stay in touch, and I still have my address book full of my other friends' phone numbers. And then if one day AT&T starts charging way too much every month, or their signal in my neighborhood is really weak, I don't have to stick with them. I could switch over to T-Mobile or another provider, but I could still keep my same phone number. So David wouldn't even have to know that I switched providers, and he could still reach me and call me, and I could still call all of my friends too. So in the same way that you can like swap out phone providers, that's kind of like the model we want to bring to Blue Sky. So Blue Sky, the company, is actually building two things in parallel, where the first one is this social app that you might be familiar with. And then the second one is an open ecosystem where our competitors can and are providing the same services to users and competing with us. I think it sounds a bit counterintuitive to be like, as a business, we want to leave space for our competitors. But actually for us, this is just like very vision aligned. Like we want to actually provide users with meaningful choice. And that only actually comes to fruition when there are other providers to choose from.
I don't know if Julian or Kenya, if you wanted to get in here, or I could move on to the next question. Okay, I want to just talk. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, but so I'll just ask one more, and then we'll get to the questions from our audience. But I want to talk a bit about content moderation, and specifically about what I call the stupid neighbor problem, because so much of what we talk about is people making sure that controlling their own experience, they can control what they see and develop their own algorithms. But a lot of the internet problems we see are not people concerned about their own experience, but concerned about other people's experiences online, and that their friends and neighbors aren't making good choices, aren't finding healthy communities, and aren't getting good information. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with our concern about the quality of the content that other people see? Is this something that within your services you can account for or try to empower users with?
So, no, sorry, this is a question back. So could you define once again the stupid neighbor problem? I'm not really aware of the concept.
The idea that there's people might be unhappy with social media for two reasons. One is because they don't like their own experience. The other thing is they think that other people might be having unhealthy experiences. Is there a strategy for the latter? And does this come down to having to is this just a question of content moderation, and how do we deal with that? Do you have to have centralized content moderation? Is this something you build into having is this how you define having a healthy community?
Yeah, so at Mastodon, we don't think that you need centralized moderation. And I mean, it's technically not even possible with how the network is built. But this doesn't mean that there's not coordination between Mastodon instances to solve some of the problems that you've mentioned. So this is something that it's actually quite beautiful, but also interesting to see. Seeing all these independent server owners basically coordinating a spam attack or basically the defense to a spam attack over the whole network. This is something that we see a responsibility, of course, to provide the tools, but also basically the community to make such a coordination possible. And there's obviously opinions that we have built over the years, how things should be dealt with in such a situation. But it's something that we don't run with a centralized belief. This is how it should be done for the whole network. And I believe, it may sound risky and it may sound dangerous and everything, but I think moderation is not perfect on Mastodon. I think nobody claims that, but it's actually pretty okay for considering that this is a network of individuals and organizations that are all connected very loosely, just from a technical point of view.
Thanks. Emily, did you want to?
Sure. I think whether or not centralized moderation is crucial to a social network is still like an ongoing experiment. But whether or not it's possible, I feel like it is still a company's responsibility to provide a safe and pleasant user experience for people who are using the app. And if not from like an ethical standpoint, then maybe even from like a brand safety standpoint, like you don't want some of this like abusive content right next to your company's logo. I think generally moderation is like a very resource intensive, expensive like task. It's a lot of hard work, and people like there is a lot of bad content on the internet. I think like wherever there are users, wherever there are people, there will be bad content. This is just like a fact of the internet, unfortunately. And I think it's like useful that companies have centralized services that take down CSAM, for example, which stands for like child sexual abuse material. Companies with the resources who are able to just provide that layer of moderation for the whole network. Just to describe briefly how moderation works on Blue Sky, and also to address your question, David, about like the what was it? The bad neighbor problem? I forgot what you called it. The stupid neighbor problem. So Blue Sky takes a two-prong approach to moderation. The first fold is the approach that people here are probably pretty familiar with. So we have a 24/7 content moderation team that responds to users' reports of like spam, scam, hate speech, harassment, etc. on the app. But then on top of that, we also just think it's impossible for a single company, a small team, to get moderation online safety right for every culture in the world. And so users are able to stack on additional moderation decisions from organizations or people that they trust. So let's say you have like a really strong opinion about AI generated art, like you never want to see that. Blue Sky, the company, doesn't have a stance on it. We're not like, we are going to take down content just because it's AI generated. But some artists on the network have created their own moderation service where if you subscribe to it as easily as following an account, then you can filter out AI generated art from your experience of Blue Sky. So in this way, it's like communities are empowered to build their own tools, and like their neighbors could subscribe to that and then get their moderation decisions on top of Blue Sky's foundation of moderation.
Yeah, Kenny, you've talked a bit already about how Spill, this is a sort of a main focus of the culture of the site. Do you want to add a bit more?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at Spill, we've got 2 years worth of data that shows that we have 66% less hate speech and harassment by volume than other legacy platforms. And we accomplished that through the things that you've heard me talk about already that I'll just reiterate, which is having the first ever large language model trained for community moderation by the communities who receive the most hate, right? So it's informed in nuance in that way. And also by having a 24/7, 365 dedicated team, like Emily talked about, of culturally competent, trained humans in the loop, to Jillian's phrase that she educated us about at the top of this. And so what we realized is that means that we haven't had to take a heavy-handed approach to moderation. Actually, the community has started to normalize these values and the set of values and morals, which is culture defined, right? A set of mores and values. And so they've even taken it a step further by doing kind of a form of what Emily is talking about. But on Spill, it looks like using some of our features and functions to help self-govern and customize their feeds. On Spill, you have 3 different feeds that you can engage with and help to customize for yourself. And there's an Everybody Sees Everything feed, which is, kind of, a real-time time-stamped feed that generates, but there's also something called My Brew, where we love a tea analogy, we can't get away from it, but where you can customize, following people and certain tags. Hashtags on Spill are communities, not necessarily tools that you use to try to amplify your reach, because you don't have to work around a weird algorithm to amplify your reach. And so in that customization, folks are doing things like, saying, hey, when you post political news, can you add a trigger warning for some of us who come from communities that don't necessarily want to engage with that type of content? So they're taking what we're delivering from a features perspective and further customizing their experience to help normalize, connectivity in niche communities on Spill. And that's incredibly encouraging for us. We have a lot to still develop at Spill. And I think that's the most exciting part for us, is to have all of these different indicators of success that we're going in the right way. Means that as we continue to develop while we're still in beta, and come into, what 2.0 looks like for us even, we're building on some incredible foundation that, again, hasn't been done before, because communities who, again, Black communities, brown communities, queer communities, who are responsible for the majority of, the best of internet culture, have never been built for, and in turn have been built around and therefore harmed in the process, while platforms have depended on the virality that they generate in order to claim success. And so we feel that this is a really winning combination, and we're going to keep going forward.
Thanks. And Jillian, you wrote the book on content moderation. So what are the lessons or the hazards that these folks should keep in mind?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to shift the question a little bit from is it possible to what's right? And I think, I agree with Emily that there is a responsibility here. If you'd asked me this maybe a decade ago, I would have had a different opinion. But over the years, having worked with different communities around the world, I have come to the belief that content moderation is necessary, although I still believe in not free speech maximalism, but maximizing the expression that users can have on these platforms while still protecting the most vulnerable and marginalized groups that use platforms. Who are, again, some of the most important groups on these platforms. So first of all, I think that we can and should leave a lot in the hands of users. We've heard about that from Blue Sky and Mastodon in particular. But there are still, of course, some things like child sexual abuse material and other types of content that I think most people agree do cross a red line, and services do need to be prepared to deal with those. But at the same time, and I think we're seeing this now, I'm of the opinion that we can and should have a multitude of spaces that users can move between. So if you don't like this platform, vote with your feet, move to this platform. And of course, that risks fragmentation. But if you don't like the rules, there's another place to go. And I think it's at the same time important for service providers to recognize how attached people can be to a given network. Seeing a question in the comments that kind of speaks to that as well, and asking why people aren't moving to certain platforms. I won't answer it directly because it might come up again, but I just want to say, note how hard it can be for some people to leave their beloved networks behind. And I know I've personally dealt with this with a platform that I won't name directly, but that as a user, I'm still kind of recovering many of my connections. And yeah, I mean, I guess, for a lot of people, for some people, it's just a matter of losing a place where they enjoyed themselves and had fun. For other people, it can be their livelihood. And I think that that's something that we need to remember as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and arguably, I believe a lot of us new entrants in this social media arena, we have not made this migration from legacy social networks, as Kenya called them. I really like this term. We have not made this migration possible easy enough, I believe. So it's still probably, from a user experience perspective, it's still a bit too hard. So I understand that point.
And when you get to oh, sorry, do you have more, Felix?
No, sorry, this thought came a bit late. But I obviously still think that it's worth it to take the dip, basically.
Great. Let's get to some of the questions, and feel free, please, just to jump in. What do we do about the rise of AI slop? How do you deal with that, and what effect does that have on your services? Anyone have an AI slop issue, or have you solved it?
Okay, do you want to go first?
After you. No, after you.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier that some users have been building moderation services for their own communities, like things to remove generative AI. I think that's one approach. Blue Sky also recently announced a proposal for like user intents to specify whether, as a user, you want your profile, your posts to be available for generative AI agents or like LLMs to even collect in the first place. So I think that's like one step forward in giving like users the ability to express whether or not they want to opt in or opt out of that kind of crawling. Yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Felix.
Yeah, so I mean, answering your question, David, I don't believe that this is like a real issue yet on Mastodon. It may have to do with this becomes more of an issue once we reach 100x the size of what we currently are. So, but at this very moment, I'm not aware that it's like a real issue on Mastodon yet. But I appreciate also Emily's response, because it's quite interesting to think of this moderation tool specifically to anti-AI, basically.
Adding on one quick note, I think one thing about AI slop is that some people can't tell when it's AI slop, like they think it's real, and that is worrying to me. So I think like some kind of feature where you can you require users to identify when something is AI generated would be useful. I always worry when like they show me something and I'm like, wait, this is not real, this is fake, and they're like, oh wait, really?
Yeah, to that point, we at Spill really come at this from the angle of recognizing the harm that, AI generated content, particularly around misinformation and disinformation, has historically had on the communities that we center on platform. And when we say we center these communities, we don't mean that Spill is a place that is exclusively for these communities. We just mean that we're making sure that they are protected and thought of intently in not just policy, but also practice and the build and the tech and all of that. From a misinformation, disinformation place, this is something that we're still leaning into studying, but we don't currently deal with those problems on platform. And we're really learning from partners like Onyx Impact, who are doing incredible work in the industry around helping to create tools and really speak very loudly about the impacts of misinformation and disinformation that is generated by AI that is not culturally competent and informed on the necessities and the needs from these communities. I will say that there are a lot of opportunities present for what happens when AI can be integrated into these experiences. And that's why we are leaning into also, what happens when AI is trained for good? How can that enhance our experiences? Because the truth of the matter is AI has been surrounding our online experiences for 10, 15 years in the form of recommendations, right? In the form of integrations, whether we've acknowledged it as AI or not, has to do with, I think, the language and the terminology that and the buzzwords that we talk about most recently. But AI has been around for a long time, but it hasn't necessarily been developed and informed by the people, again, who have been helping to drive its use forward. And we think that as long as we have more inclusivity in that development, it means that folks can see themselves represented and see their experiences represented in that.
Great. We have a question about using social media for activism and organizing, and with the idea being that the larger legacy social media platforms and services seem to have been black holes for activism. What lessons do we learn from that? How do we avoid that going? How do we make our services are effective tools for activism and organizing? Jillian, do I go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note that they weren't always black holes for activism. I mean, when I first started again, I know I'm aging myself. Somebody laughed at me for saying 15 years in the comments earlier. But when I first started using these platforms, they were great for the organizing that I was doing. I was engaged with a lot of things globally, and it was a great way for people to connect and get their voices heard. And obviously that changed drastically over the years as the platforms themselves changed. And so I've been really happy to hear from some of the panelists. I can't remember who said it, but about, for example, not downranking links, for allowing people to link out, and for being able to bring traffic to your own site. So I'm sure that, that's important to a lot of listeners. It's also important to EFF, of course. And yeah, so I think that there is a real opportunity for the platforms on this panel and for others that are listening to be conduits for that type of activism. And I think, again, that means listening to users, listening to their needs, consulting with civil society groups and individual activists. There's a lot of great opportunities to do that. But also, making sure that you're not putting profit before people.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that quickly. I always thought it was wild when literal heads of state or government figures would post on a social network and just hope that the algorithm delivered their message to the right people. They just had no say in how that information was getting spread. And obviously that's a different angle of from activism of trying to do more grassroots organizing. But I think the root is the same, which is that as users, we just did not have control over the algorithm at all. Meanwhile, in Blue Sky, you're able to build custom feeds, which is your own algorithms to power timelines that you get to choose. So one example that I want to highlight is the city of Boston has been a really early adopter of Blue Sky. They're creating accounts for both the official city account as well as their city agencies. But the coolest use case that I've seen them do is build a custom feed specific to the city of Boston. So any users who pin this custom feed to their Blue Sky app can see every post that they've made in the order that the Boston city government chooses. And so in this way, any Boston residents who pin that feed can guarantee that they're going to see posts from the agencies, from the mayor, from the city that they follow, and not have to worry that some algorithm is tweaking it because the Boston city government is the one that runs that feed. It's hosted on their infrastructure. It's so customizable to the point that if someone downloaded the Blue Sky app, but they were like, I actually don't care about anything else that's happening on Blue Sky, I just want to see what the city of Boston has to say, they could remove all of Blue Sky's defaults and simply pin the Boston city feed. And then every time they open the Blue Sky app, it's really just the Boston app at that point. So the city of Boston can totally just use the real estate of Blue Sky to deliver their message. Similarly, activists could do the same thing for specific campaigns as well. And they actually get control over the algorithm.
Thanks, Emily. I know we're running out of time. Just to add 2 sentences to this. so for activists or maybe also investigative journalists, I think very often they overlap, these two groups. For example, running your own Mastodon server, it gives you a lot of power of staying in control and making sure that your following actually gets these important messages that you have to disseminate.
Hey, thanks. And we are almost out of time. Actually, Kenya, do you want to have a last comment you want to make? Rather about,
sure.
There's lots of questions about algorithms and how and things, but if there one closing comment you'd like to make.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just say this, that, we recognize that the history of algorithms, particularly recently on platforms, has systematically targeted and suppressed the necessity for sharing information that is most vital to, again, culture-driving communities. And so at Spill, we also don't deprioritize links. We don't have, weird algorithms that you have to work around or try to create your own series of hashtags in order to amplify your message. And you don't have to have a fear of being shadow banned in any sort of way. Our guidelines are really, really clear. And with the normalization that is happening with the community, it's empowering people to use our beta features like groups to create really awesome sub-niche communities that allow them to build community in these spaces and connect around like minds and interests. And, as we continue to develop our features, we're paying attention to what matters most to them. And so the AI development that we are leaning into in order to, serve up recommendations and help people connect and find other folks that are into the same things that they're into, really prioritize that safety and authentic connection that is why people flock to Spill. And so I think, this has been an incredible discussion. First of all, I'll just say I really appreciate Emily and Felix and Jillian, and thank you, David, for moderating this. I'm definitely learning a lot and appreciate this discourse and also the leadership of EFF.
Well, and thank you all. That's all we have time for. And so thank you, Jillian and Felix and Kenya and Emily, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion in the chat and all the great questions. I'm sorry we got to only very few of them, but we have them all, and we will do our best I can to respond to people. And thanks to everyone watching around the world. Digital rights begins with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, freedom of expression, and innovation for 34 years, and we need your help to keep up the fight. Become a member today at EFF.org/support-change. We hope you will continue these conversations about your civil liberties with your colleagues and friends. Be sure to keep an eye out for the next segments of Effecting Change throughout the year. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you.